The stage was set, the lights dimmed, and an expectant crowd settled into their seats waiting for one of comedy's most respected voices to take the stage. Jon Stewart, a man whose name had long become synonymous with sharp political commentary and unflinching satire, walked onto the Netflix stage with the kind of quiet confidence only decades in the spotlight can afford. There was electricity in the air, the sort of restless anticipation that builds when an audience knows they're about to witness a cultural moment. But no one in that room, nor the millions who would later see the clips online, anticipated just how far Stewart would go when he turned his wit toward one of the most polarizing figures of our time, Meghan Markle. Within minutes, a joke landed so brutally, so cuttingly hilarious, that the crowd erupted into laughter and the internet exploded. The label Duchess of Dumbshit was born, and nothing about Meghan Markle's already fragile public image would ever be the same. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why did it strike such a chord? To understand that, you have to start with Jon Stewart himself. Unlike many comics who thrive on cheap shots and fleeting viral moments, Stewart has always been careful in how he wields his humor. He's a craftsman, building his jokes with precision, ensuring that when they land, they don't just make people laugh, they make them think. His special wasn't just another night of jokes. It was a reflection of the culture, the frustrations, the contradictions we live with every day. So when he shifted his focus to Meghan, the room collectively leaned forward. Here was a duchess who had stepped away from the crown, wrapped herself in celebrity, and stumbled through controversy after controversy. Stewart knew the territory was ripe, and he struck like a seasoned satirist who had been waiting for the right moment. The setup was simple. Stewart spoke about the bizarre theater of modern royalty and how, in a world facing real struggles, the endless headlines about Harry and Meghan seemed both absurd and exhausting. The punchline, though, was a thunderbolt, referring to her not as Duchess of Sussex, but as Duchess of Dumbshit. The audience roared, and in that instant, the mask of untouchability Meghan had so carefully tried to wear cracked open. This wasn't a bitter tabloid headline or a cruel internet meme. It was a cultural heavyweight, a man respected for decades, cutting her down in front of a live audience and a Netflix camera crew. And what made it even more explosive was that it was funny. Not mean-spirited in the sense of pure malice, but funny in the way truth sometimes is when spoken out loud in a room full of people who've secretly been thinking the same thing. Comedy, when it's at its best, acts as a mirror. It reflects the absurdities of life, the hypocrisies, the contradictions, and holds them up for everyone to see. Meghan Markle had long tried to shape her narrative as the misunderstood duchess, the woman who stood up against a centuries-old institution, the victim of relentless press scrutiny. Yet, her Netflix shows, her Spotify deal, her public appearances often seemed more like vanity projects than meaningful contributions. Audiences began to question her authenticity, sensing a widening gap between her words and her actions. Stewart tapped into that exact feeling. His joke crystallized what many had whispered but few dared to say on such a stage, that perhaps Meghan, for all her carefully crafted image, was not a symbol of empowerment but of entitlement. The crowd's reaction told its own story. They weren't just laughing at a clever line. They were releasing a pent-up frustration. The laughter was cathartic, a way of acknowledging that yes, the royal drama had become ridiculous, and yes, Meghan had positioned herself at the center of it with questionable success. The viral clips captured not just Stewart's delivery, but the collective exhale of an audience that had been waiting for someone to finally puncture the bubble. When the video hit social media, it spread like wildfire. Twitter feeds lit up with the quote. TikTok users clipped it into montages, and YouTube channels broke down the moment frame by frame. The phrase Duchess of Dumbshit wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a headline, a meme, a cultural stamp that would follow Meghan wherever she went. But the significance goes beyond the laughter. Stewart's moment highlighted something deeper about how society views Meghan Markle. On one hand, she is defended by a loyal base of fans who see her as a victim of racism, misogyny, and an outdated monarchy. On the other, she is criticized by those who believe she has exploited her royal title while simultaneously claiming to reject it. Stewart didn't need to delve into the politics of it. The power of his joke was that it distilled the argument into a single, unforgettable phrase. By calling her Duchess of Dumb Shit, he wasn't just mocking Meghan. He was mocking the spectacle of her entire public persona, the contradictions, the tone deafness, the relentless pursuit of relevance. The beauty of a great introduction is that it sets the tone for what's to come. And this moment did exactly that. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about calling out the absurdity of the situation in a way that was both hilarious and undeniable. Audiences knew they were watching more than a comedy bit. They were watching a cultural reset. They knew this was going to ripple beyond Netflix and into mainstream headlines, drawing reactions from royalists, critics, Meghan's PR team, and even other comedians. It was the spark that would ignite an entire conversation about celebrity, royalty, and the limits of sympathy in a media-saturated world. As Stewart carried on with his set, the audience kept buzzing, the kind of energy that comes when a comedian hits a nerve so precisely that the room doesn't recover for minutes afterward. He knew it, the audience knew it, and soon the entire world would know it. In the span of a single punchline, Stewart had managed to do what countless opinion pieces, interviews, and documentaries had failed to accomplish. He cut through the noise and delivered the unvarnished truth in a way everyone could understand. And that's where our story begins, with one man, one joke, and one duchess whose carefully curated image crumbled under the weight of a well-timed laugh. Jon Stewart's legendary style has always been rooted in something deeper than comedy. For decades, audiences tuned into him not just for laughter, but for clarity in a world where politics, celebrity, and media often blurred together. He carried himself with the posture of a man who could distill chaos into digestible truths, and his sharp timing meant that when he delivered a punchline, it carried the weight of both entertainment and revelation. To understand why his joke about Meghan Markle went viral and resonated so powerfully, one must first dive into what makes Stewart unique and why his brand of satire holds a special place in modern culture. His career took shape at a time when television news was losing credibility, when viewers were tired of stale reporting and empty headlines. Stewart gave them something refreshing. Through The Daily Show, he transformed the way people consumed news. He wasn't just a host. He became a voice of reason, unmasking hypocrisy with humor, making politics accessible to younger audiences who would otherwise turn away from it. That authenticity built trust. People didn't just laugh with Stewart, they believed him. So when a figure like Meghan Markle, already surrounded by controversy and accusations of hypocrisy, landed in his comedic crosshairs, it wasn't just a joke. It was a pronouncement from someone who had spent years exposing illusions. Stewart's comedic style thrives on contrasts. He sets up expectations in a calm, rational manner, almost as if he's speaking like a professor explaining a lesson, and then dismantles those expectations with razor-sharp irony. This is what made the Duchess of Dumb Shit line hit so hard. It wasn't thrown out recklessly. It was delivered with the calculated rhythm of a comedian who knows that a single word can flatten a persona more effectively than 1,000 op-eds. The choice of language, crass, simple, unforgettable, was deliberate. Stewart knows comedy works best when it speaks plainly, stripping away the polish to reveal raw perception. And in that one phrase, he condensed a decade of media narratives, public missteps, and audience fatigue into a single unforgettable blow. The reason Stewart's style has endured for so long is because he never aimed to be universally liked. He understood that good comedy requires risk, that laughter often comes at the expense of someone's pride or power. Yet, his jokes are rarely mean for the sake of being mean. They are crafted to expose, to hold up a mirror. In Meghan Markle's case, the mirror revealed a duchess who had tried to step away from the monarchy, yet continued to cash in on its prestige. Stewart didn't have to spell out the contradictions. His audience already knew them. All he had to do was crystallize the sentiment into a sharp jab. And that is where his genius lies, in saying what others hesitate to say, but in a way that feels undeniable once it's spoken. His legendary style is also marked by timing. Stewart doesn't just tell jokes, he orchestrates them. He understands the rhythm of tension and release, the importance of pacing. In the Netflix special, he built up the absurdity of modern royalty, letting the audience stew in the ridiculousness of endless media coverage before dropping the hammer. Timing in comedy is everything, and Stewart has mastered it to the point where he can anticipate the exact moment a crowd is ready to explode. That night, the audience didn't just laugh. They erupted because the release matched the tension he had carefully constructed. What sets Stewart apart from others is also his refusal to play safe when it comes to public figures. Many comedians shy away from attacking those who still command power or maintain a delicate image, afraid of backlash or alienating a segment of their audience. Stewart has never lived in that fear. He has taken on presidents, corporations, media networks, and cultural icons. Meghan Markle was no different. By treating her as fair game, he signaled that the protective bubble around her had burst. She was no longer untouchable, no longer shielded by her royal title or victim narrative. For an audience tired of careful pandering, this boldness was liberating. His humor also thrives on observation. Stewart doesn't need to invent elaborate scenarios to make his point. Instead, he takes what is already visible, what is already whispered about, and articulates it in a way that forces acknowledgement. Meghan's public struggles, her failed projects, her polarizing interviews, all of it was material lying in plain sight. Stewart's brilliance was in condensing that mountain of contradictions into one cutting line that would outlive any formal critique. The simplicity of his phrasing was the essence of his style, sharp observation, stripped of excess. Of course, Stewart's comedy is not without controversy. His bluntness has often sparked debates, but that's part of the legacy he's built. He thrives on confrontation, not in the sense of being combative, but in pushing conversations forward. His Netflix special, like much of his career, showed that laughter can coexist with critique, that humor can be a vehicle for uncomfortable truths. Meghan Markle's name becoming entangled with his brand of satire cemented the idea that she was not above scrutiny, and that her image, no matter how carefully curated, was vulnerable to cultural ridicule. Stewart's legendary style is the culmination of years spent perfecting the art of balancing comedy with commentary. His Meghan Markle moment wasn't just another gag. It was a demonstration of why his voice still matters in a landscape oversaturated with comedians competing for relevance. He doesn't chase trends. He creates moments that transcend them. He doesn't simply aim for laughs. He aims for resonance. That's why this joke didn't fade away after the special aired. It lingered, it echoed, it replayed endlessly online because it carried the hallmarks of his style: precision, fearlessness, and cultural insight. And when the laughter died down, what remained was not just a joke about a duchess, but a reminder of why Jon Stewart is still one of the most respected voices in comedy. His style endures because it doesn't rely on gimmicks or trends. It relies on truth. And when truth is delivered with the force of humor, it becomes unforgettable. The Netflix special did not appear in a vacuum. Months of anticipation, subtle marketing strategies, and the cultural weight of Jon Stewart's return to a major platform set the stage for the moment that would eventually dominate headlines. To understand why the Meghan Markle joke hit as hard as it did, it's important to first explore the careful build-up that surrounded the special. Netflix knew what it was doing when it greenlit Stewart's project. They weren't just buying into a comedian's set. They were investing in the nostalgia of his legacy, the sharpness of his wit, and the promise that he could deliver a cultural event in an era when comedy specials often drown in a sea of forgettable content. For years, Stewart had stepped back from the relentless grind of hosting The Daily Show. His absence left a void, one that countless successors tried to fill but never quite managed to replicate. The announcement of his Netflix special was more than news. It was a signal that he was ready to re-enter the cultural arena. And because Stewart rarely does anything without purpose, audiences knew this wasn't going to be a simple collection of recycled jokes. It was going to be an event with intention. In the weeks leading up to its release, Netflix carefully teased the special without giving too much away. Clips leaked of Stewart warming up his audience. Promos hinted at sharp political commentary, and interview snippets revealed that he was ready to take aim at not just politicians, but the absurdities of celebrity culture. The timing of the release couldn't have been more deliberate. The world was already buzzing with headlines about the British royals, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry. Their documentary had left audiences divided. Their interviews with Oprah and others had reignited debates about race, privilege, and monarchy, and their attempts to carve out space in Hollywood had been met with skepticism. Against this backdrop, Stewart's special arrived like a scalpel slicing through noise. Netflix leaned into this climate of controversy, subtly positioning the special as not only a return of a legend, but also a reflection on modern fame. They knew that Stewart's voice, combined with the chaotic energy of the royal debates, would generate a perfect storm. Audiences came to the special with expectations. They wanted Stewart to be Stewart, to blend intelligence with humor, to offer commentary that felt more like truth-telling than mere comedy. But more importantly, they wanted him to say what many had been thinking but few had dared to articulate. That anticipation hung heavy in the air as the night of filming arrived. Audience members weren't just there to laugh. They were there to witness a statement. You could feel it in the way the room leaned forward with every setup, waiting for the inevitable punchlines that would ripple far beyond the stage. The build-up also mattered because Stewart himself had been relatively quiet on Meghan Markle until this moment. While other comedians and late-night hosts dipped into royal jokes, Stewart largely avoided them, focusing his humor on politics, war, climate change, and media corruption. His silence created a vacuum of expectation. If he ever chose to speak on the subject, it would not be casual or throwaway. It would be deliberate. That silence built suspense, and Netflix capitalized on it by allowing speculation to flourish. Behind the scenes, there were whispers in Hollywood that Stewart had sharpened parts of his set specifically to resonate with current cultural debates. Netflix executives, understanding the explosive potential, ensured that cameras were positioned to capture not just Stewart, but the audience's visceral reaction. They wanted virality, and they got it. The marketing team understood that modern comedy specials don't survive on television ratings alone. They thrive on clips that explode across social media platforms within minutes of release. Every laugh, every shocked gasp, every standing ovation was captured in high definition, ready to be clipped and distributed online. In the build-up, Meghan Markle herself inadvertently fueled the fire. Around the time Stewart was preparing for the special, her public image was already struggling. Reports of failed business ventures, accusations of diva behavior, and public skepticism toward her and Harry's projects were swirling. She had become a lightning rod in cultural conversations, and that meant any joke about her would land harder. Stewart didn't need to manufacture controversy. It was already there, waiting. All he had to do was harness it, and Netflix positioned his special as the stage where that cultural tension could be released. The audience who tuned in at home was not just watching for entertainment. They were there for vindication. Viewers who felt exhausted by Meghan's endless media presence were eager to see someone of Stewart's stature cut through the noise. That eagerness explains why, when the special dropped, it immediately became one of Netflix's most talked-about releases. It wasn't just about the comedy. It was about timing, context, and the sense that this was the moment where years of eye-rolling headlines finally collided with a punchline sharp enough to pierce the bubble. Netflix itself leaned heavily on the viral nature of the joke once it happened. Within hours, their official accounts shared snippets, influencers reshared the clips, and entertainment outlets framed it as the moment of the night. It was clear that the platform had anticipated this level of attention. What they couldn't have predicted was how far it would spread, how quickly the phrase, "Duchess of Dumbshit," would outpace the special itself. In many ways, the build-up was a masterclass in cultural timing. The return of Jon Stewart, the saturation of Meghan Markle in the headlines, and the readiness of audiences to laugh at a figure who had positioned herself as untouchable. Even those who didn't normally engage with Stewart found themselves watching the clips, curious about what he had said to spark such an uproar. This was the kind of cultural cross-pollination Netflix craved. It wasn't just a comedy special anymore. It was a social event, a flashpoint in the ongoing debate about fame, privilege, and authenticity. The build-up had done its work. By the time Stewart uttered the line that would echo across platforms, the world was primed to receive it. In retrospect, the build-up to the Netflix special was as important as the joke itself. Without the careful orchestration of timing, context, and anticipation, Stewart's jab at Meghan might have landed as just another punchline. Instead, it became a defining cultural moment because the stage had been perfectly set. Every factor, the marketing teasers, Meghan's ongoing controversies, the legacy of Stewart's voice, and the hunger of audiences for unfiltered commentary combined to create an atmosphere where one line could ignite a wildfire. And ignite it did, ensuring that Stewart's special would be remembered not just as a return of a legend, but as a turning point in how Meghan Markle is perceived in the cultural arena. The joke itself, the moment that has since been replayed endlessly across social media feeds, was as much about timing and delivery as it was about the words spoken. Jon Stewart had built his reputation on knowing how to wield silence, how to let an audience lean forward just enough before shattering the tension with a single line. That mastery was on full display when he turned his attention to Meghan Markle. It wasn't the first time a public figure had been the subject of a comedian's barbs, but there was something about this particular jab, about the precision of it, the rawness of it, that made it unforgettable. As Stewart moved through his set, he had already warmed the audience up with sharp commentary about politics and society. He had everyone in that room laughing, nodding, and applauding at regular intervals. By the time he shifted toward a discussion of celebrity culture and modern royalty, the audience was primed. They were ready for something risky, something bold. Stewart set the stage with a few observations about the absurdity of monarchy in the 21st century, about how strange it was that in a world full of genuine problems, climate change, economic instability, inequality, the media remained fixated on two people who had stepped away from royal duties but seemed determined to stay in the spotlight. His tone was light, conversational, almost academic at first, lulling the audience into a rhythm. Then came the pivot. He leaned forward slightly, as though letting the audience in on a secret, and remarked that the titles didn't even make sense anymore. Why, he asked, should anyone continue calling Meghan Markle the Duchess of Sussex when she herself had walked away from royal responsibilities? He let the question hang there, the audience buzzing with anticipation. And then, with perfect timing, he dropped it, Duchess of Dumb Shit. The words were simple, almost crude in their construction, but the effect was explosive. The room erupted. The crowd's laughter was not the polite chuckle that often follows a clever quip. It was the deep, unrestrained laughter of people who had been holding something in, waiting for permission to release it. Some doubled over, some clapped, some hollered. There was a collective sense that a line had been crossed in the best way possible. It was the sort of laughter that feeds itself, rolling in waves, refusing to die down quickly. Stewart stood there, calm and collected, letting the energy swirl around him. That confidence was part of the delivery. He didn't rush to follow it up with another line. He let the audience savor it, replay it in their minds, and laugh harder the second time. The brilliance of the delivery was that it wasn't forced. Stewart didn't hammer the joke with unnecessary explanation or overemphasis. He spoke it plainly, as though it were the most natural conclusion in the world. That subtlety added to the impact. The audience didn't just laugh because of what he said. They laughed because of how casually he said it, as though stripping away Meghan's title and dignity was the most obvious thing to do. That casual delivery made it sting more, and the sting is what made it stick. On social media, the delivery became just as much a point of discussion as the joke itself. Clips showed Stewart's body language, the slight smirk, the relaxed posture, the pause before delivering the punchline. Comedians often talk about how comedy is more about rhythm than content, and this moment proved it. Had Stewart rushed the line or delivered it with too much aggression, it might have come across as bitter or cruel. Instead, it was smooth, almost effortless, which is why it resonated so strongly. The crowd reaction amplified everything. An audience is a living organism, and once a joke takes root, the collective energy can make it grow larger than life. The Netflix cameras captured faces of people laughing so hard they could barely breathe, couples elbowing each other as if to say, "Did he really just say that?" And even a few people wiping tears of laughter from their eyes. That kind of reaction doesn't just happen because of clever wordplay. It happens because the audience feels like a truth has been spoken aloud. Comedy, at its best, validates what people are already thinking, and Stewart's joke did exactly that. It's worth noting that not everyone in the audience laughed for the same reason. Some laughed out of pure humor. The bluntness of the nickname was enough. Others laughed out of relief, glad someone had finally said what they were thinking. And some laughed nervously, aware of the sharpness of the insult, but swept along by the momentum of the crowd. That mixture of reactions gave the moment texture, ensuring that it wasn't just a gag, but a cultural flashpoint. The virality of the moment was also tied to the crowd's reaction. When clips began to circulate online, viewers weren't just watching Stewart. They were watching the audience respond. They were hearing the roars of laughter, seeing the standing ovation, feeling the energy as if they had been in the room themselves. That collective response gave the joke legitimacy. It wasn't just one comedian making fun of a duchess. It was an entire room agreeing, laughing, and carrying the sentiment forward. In the hours that followed, the joke took on a life of its own. Hashtags trended, edits were made, and commentary poured in from every corner of the internet. What people kept pointing out was not only the sharpness of Stewart's line, but the way he delivered it. It felt less like a comedian reaching for a cheap shot, and more like a cultural elder pointing out the obvious with a wink. That distinction is what made the moment so powerful. Comedy has always had the ability to reshape narratives, and this particular joke did exactly that. Meghan Markle, who had spent years trying to present herself as a modern, misunderstood royal, suddenly found herself branded with a crude but unforgettable title. Stewart had taken all the complexity of her media image, the interviews, the documentaries, the business deals, the controversies, and condensed it into 2 words. And because of the delivery, those 2 words hit with the force of a cultural verdict. The aftermath only reinforced the power of the delivery. People began quoting the line in everyday conversations. Journalists debated whether Stewart had gone too far, and fans of comedy praised him for saying what so many had thought. The joke became more than entertainment. It became a shorthand for frustration with Meghan's public persona. And that's the true measure of a great comedic moment, when it leaves the stage and enters the lexicon of culture. Stewart knew exactly what he was doing. His years of experience had taught him not just how to write a joke, but how to deliver it in a way that ensured it would linger. By trusting the timing, by letting the audience breathe and react, he elevated a simple insult into a cultural phenomenon. That night, the joke wasn't just a line in a comedy set. It was a moment of release, a collective laugh that resonated far beyond the walls of the theater. And in the process, it cemented Stewart's reputation as a comedian whose words can still shake the cultural landscape when delivered with precision. Meghan Markle's rise from television actress to global household name was not built solely on her talent or charm, but on the storm of publicity that followed her every step once she entered the royal sphere. That publicity, for all the doors it opened, also turned her into prime material for comedy. Comedians thrive on contradictions, ironies, and the dissonance between how someone wants to be seen and how they are actually perceived. Meghan embodied all of those contradictions in a way few modern public figures have. To understand why Jon Stewart's joke hit so hard, it's necessary to look at why she became such a ripe target in the first place. Why the stage was already set for audiences to laugh at her expense long before Stewart delivered the line. From the moment she married Prince Harry, Meghan Markle became a figure of fascination and division. To her supporters, she represented progress. A biracial, American woman stepping into the most traditional of institutions, bringing freshness and modernity to the monarchy. To her critics, she was an opportunist who knew exactly what she was getting into and who, when the pressure mounted, weaponized victimhood to position herself as a martyr. Comedy feeds off that polarization. A person who is universally admired or universally hated leaves little room for humor. But someone who inspires both defense and disdain opens up endless comedic possibilities. Stewart understood this perfectly. Part of Meghan's comedic vulnerability lies in her relationship with titles. She has, on one hand, claimed to reject the rigid traditions of the monarchy, emphasizing independence and the desire to build her own life outside of royal control. On the other hand, she and Harry have consistently used their titles to bolster their projects, whether in media, philanthropy, or entertainment. That tension between renouncing the monarchy while still profiting from its prestige is a contradiction ripe for ridicule. The Duchess of Dumbshit line crystallized that contradiction into a laugh. By mocking the very title she simultaneously downplays and clings to, Stewart exposed the absurdity at the heart of her brand. Another reason Meghan has become comedy material is her overexposure. In a media environment where visibility often equates to influence, she and Harry have leaned heavily into public storytelling. They've sat down for interviews, produced documentaries, launched podcasts, and released memoirs. Instead of retreating into private life as they once claimed they wanted, they flooded the public with their perspective. Overexposure, however, has the opposite effect on audiences. Instead of fostering empathy, it breeds skepticism and fatigue. The more someone insists on controlling their narrative, the more comedians and critics feel compelled to puncture it. Stewart, like many before him, seized on that saturation. By the time he told the joke, the public had already been primed to laugh at Meghan because they were tired of her constant presence. Her business ventures also provided fodder for comedians. High-profile deals with companies like Netflix and Spotify initially generated excitement, but quickly faltered. The Spotify deal, for example, ended prematurely, with critics suggesting her content lacked originality and spark. Her Netflix projects, while heavily promoted, struggled to leave a lasting cultural mark. To a comedian, those failures are comedic gold. They reveal the gap between the image Meghan wants to project, a visionary, groundbreaking creator, and the reality of how her work is received. Stewart's joke worked not only because of its wording, but because it came on the heels of this string of underwhelming projects, making the punchline feel like a natural commentary on her record of missteps. Then there is the issue of perceived hypocrisy. Meghan has often spoken about the importance of privacy, only to later invite the public into intimate details of her life through interviews and productions. She has condemned the media for intrusion while simultaneously participating in media spectacles that keep her name in the headlines. This inconsistency is exactly the kind of thing comedians latch onto. Hypocrisy, or even the perception of it, undermines credibility. And once credibility weakens, comedy swoops in to fill the void. Stewart's jab, though blunt, tapped directly into this perception of double standards, and that's why audiences laughed. Not because they despised Meghan necessarily, but because the contradiction was undeniable. Her relationship with Prince Harry also contributes to why she became comedic material. Harry, once known for his wild youth and occasional gaffes, transformed into a figure of seriousness and sensitivity under Meghan's influence. To many, it looked as though Meghan had reshaped him, taking him from a relatable royal who sometimes embarrassed the monarchy to a scripted, polished spokesman for grievances. That narrative, whether fair or not, cast Meghan as the one pulling the strings, a controlling partner steering Harry away from his roots. For comedians, this dynamic invites humor. The idea of a once rebellious prince turned into a mouthpiece for carefully curated victimhood becomes an easy setup for ridicule. Stewart's audience, aware of this transformation, didn't need explanation. They only needed the shorthand of a brutal nickname. Cultural timing also played a role. At the moment Stewart made his joke, Meghan was not in a phase of triumph. She was not unveiling a wildly successful project or enjoying a wave of sympathy. Instead, she was facing mounting criticism, waning public support, and a growing reputation for failed endeavors. Comedians rarely target those at their peak because it risks backlash. They target those who are already stumbling because the audience is more receptive to laughter. Stewart's timing was impeccable. He caught Meghan at a moment when public frustration had built to a point where laughter was not only possible, but cathartic. Beyond her specific actions, Meghan embodies broader cultural themes that comedians thrive on. Celebrity narcissism, the clash between old-world royalty and new-world media culture, and the contradictions of privilege cloaked in victimhood. These themes resonate because they are larger than Meghan herself. Stewart's audience wasn't just laughing at her. They were laughing at what she represents. The absurdity of people who claim oppression while living in luxury, the spectacle of fame masquerading as substance. In this way, Meghan became a symbol, and symbols are always easier to mock than individuals. It's also worth noting that Meghan's defenders inadvertently make her even more of a comedic target. The fierceness with which some protect her image contrasts sharply with the visible cracks in her public persona. That defensiveness sets up a dynamic where any criticism, no matter how mild, is met with outrage. For comedians, that outrage is fuel. The more untouchable someone is portrayed, the funnier it becomes when they are mocked. Stewart exploited that dynamic to perfection. By dropping his lines so casually, he made it impossible for defenders to respond without appearing humorless. Ultimately, Meghan Markle became comedy material because she straddles the line between victim and villain, between royalty and celebrity, between seriousness and spectacle. She embodies contradictions, and contradictions are the lifeblood of comedy. Stewart didn't invent the criticisms of her, he distilled them. He gave voice to the fatigue, the skepticism, the eye rolls that had been building for years. And by doing so, he transformed her into a caricature with just 2 words. What makes this particularly powerful is that Meghan's journey into comedy fodder was inevitable. From the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight, her story was filled with elements that attract ridicule: the grand titles, the dramatic interviews, the failed projects, the contradictions in her messaging. Stewart's joke worked because it wasn't random. It was the culmination of years of narrative buildup. The audience didn't need an explanation. They only needed the punchline. And when it came, they laughed because the groundwork had already been laid, because Meghan had already become the embodiment of a cultural punchline waiting to happen. The moment Jon Stewart uttered the words that would become the most talked-about line of his Netflix special, the energy in the theater shifted. Laughter exploded, rolling across the room in waves that refused to die down quickly. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from a clever turn of phrase or a simple observational joke. This was different. It was deeper, more visceral, almost cathartic. The audience wasn't just laughing. They were releasing something that had been building for years. And in the digital age, that kind of reaction doesn't stay locked inside 4 walls. It spreads, multiplies, and becomes a global phenomenon. This is exactly what happened when the crowd's reaction to Stewart's takedown of Meghan Markle went viral. Within minutes of the special airing, clips were clipped, shared, and reposted across social media. Netflix had prepared for this, of course. Their cameras were trained not only on Stewart but on the audience, capturing their gasps, their doubled-over laughter, and the thunderous applause that followed the punchline. When those clips hit Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, they didn't just show Stewart delivering a joke. They showed a collective moment of release. Viewers at home weren't simply watching a comedian mock a duchess. They were witnessing a room full of people validate a sentiment that many had quietly held but hadn't seen expressed so openly on such a large stage. That validation was contagious. The crowd reaction became part of the story itself. Commentators didn't just say Stewart had insulted Meghan. They said the crowd had erupted, that the audience had nearly drowned him out with their laughter. This detail added credibility to the moment. After all, a comedian's joke only has as much power as the reaction it receives. Stewart could have made the same line fall flat in a different context, but here it was buoyed by hundreds of people laughing, clapping, and roaring in agreement. That roar was amplified 1,000 times over when it hit the internet. TikTok edits added music, slow-motion replays, and captions that highlighted the words, "Duchess of Dumb Shit." Twitter feeds filled with users debating whether the joke was cruel or brilliant, while memes began to sprout overnight. Some used photos of Meghan with captions mocking her title. Others cut Stewart's line into compilations of celebrity takedowns. The virality wasn't just about the insult itself. It was about the crowd's enthusiastic response. The sound of laughter, captured on Netflix's microphones, became a kind of cultural soundtrack. It gave people permission to laugh along at home, to share in the collective humor without guilt. This viral spread wasn't accidental. In the modern media ecosystem, comedy lives or dies by shareability. A punchline can only go so far if it stays confined to a streaming platform. But when paired with an audience reaction that feels authentic and overwhelming, it becomes irresistible content for social media. People don't just want to hear the joke, they want to experience the moment. They want to feel like they were part of that audience, caught up in the energy, laughing along with strangers. That sense of belonging is what makes clips trend, and Stewart's moment provided it in spades. Part of the reason the crowd reaction went viral is because it symbolized something larger than comedy. For many, it was the first time a respected cultural figure had so bluntly cut through the carefully constructed image Meghan Markle had tried to maintain. The laughter felt like a verdict, a collective declaration that the public was no longer buying what she was selling. Audiences online interpreted the roar of the crowd as proof that people were fed up, that Meghan's grip on cultural sympathy had slipped. The virality of the clip transformed the joke from a single comedic moment into a broader cultural commentary, reinforced by the sound of hundreds laughing in agreement. What made the moment even more powerful was how it resonated across different platforms. On TikTok, younger users embraced it with quick edits and ironic captions, turning Stewart's words into a trending audio clip. On Twitter, the debate raged between supporters and detractors, each using the clip to argue their side. On YouTube, reaction videos began appearing, with creators breaking down the joke, the delivery, and most importantly, the audience's explosive response. Even Instagram meme accounts got in on the action, pairing Stewart's punchline with unrelated images for comic effect. The virality took on a life of its own, independent of Netflix's promotion. Another aspect of the virality was the contrast between the laughter in the room and Meghan's silence in the days that followed. While the audience was howling and social media was ablaze, Meghan remained silent, choosing not to respond. That silence only added to the perception that Stewart had landed a blow too significant to ignore. Each replay of the crowd laughing became another reminder that Meghan had been humiliated publicly and that she had offered no rebuttal. For comedians, silence from the subject is often the most powerful validation. It shows that the joke stung, that it cut deep enough to warrant no response. And for audiences, that silence made the laughter feel even more triumphant. The virality of the crowd reaction also spoke to a larger hunger for moments of collective mockery in an age of divided opinions. Comedy, when it unites people in laughter, can feel like a rare reprieve from cultural polarization. In this case, the laughter at Meghan's expense became a unifying moment for many who had grown frustrated with the endless headlines about her and Harry. Even those who weren't particularly invested in royal drama found themselves sharing the clip simply because the laughter was infectious. The sound of joy, of people laughing together at the absurdity of modern fame, was enough to draw in viewers who might not even have strong feelings about Meghan herself. It's important to note that the virality of this moment did not depend on cruelty alone. While the insult was sharp, the crowd's reaction framed it as humor rather than malice. That distinction mattered. Audiences watching online didn't feel they were participating in a bullying campaign. They felt they were in on a joke. The laughter made it safe to join in, to laugh at Meghan without feeling guilty. This dynamic is crucial in comedy. A joke alone can be divisive, but a joke backed by overwhelming laughter becomes communal, almost democratic in its approval. The virality of Stewart's moment was built on that communal foundation. In the days that followed, the joke and the crowd's response became a news story in itself. Entertainment outlets ran headlines about the viral moment, framing it as a cultural event rather than just a comedy bit. Analysts weighed in on what the reaction meant for Meghan's public image, while late-night hosts referenced Stewart's line in their own monologues. The viral spread turned into a feedback loop, with coverage of the moment fueling more shares, and more shares fueling more coverage. The crowd's reaction, initially captured in one room, had become a global phenomenon, echoing across continents and platforms. The story of how the crowd reaction went viral highlights the intersection of comedy, culture, and technology. It shows how a single moment, amplified by audience energy and digital distribution, can become more significant than the content of an entire special. The Netflix cameras captured more than laughter. They captured the spark of a cultural wildfire. And as the clip spread, it became clear that the virality wasn't just about Jon Stewart's wit. It was about the collective roar of a crowd that gave millions online permission to laugh along. That roar became the defining sound of the moment, ensuring that the Duchess of Dumbshit would be remembered not just as a joke, but as a global punchline. Comedy has always been more than jokes. At its best, it is a form of cultural commentary, a way of taking the absurdities of society and translating them into moments of clarity that make people laugh and think at the same time. Jon Stewart has long embodied this principle, building a career on humor that exposes hypocrisies, challenges power, and forces audiences to confront truths they might otherwise ignore. His takedown of Meghan Markle in the Netflix special was not simply an offhand insult. It was a cultural commentary disguised as a punchline, a mirror held up to a world grappling with contradictions in fame, royalty, and privilege. The foundation of comedy as commentary lies in its ability to strip away the veneer of seriousness that people in power try to wear. When Stewart mocked Meghan by dubbing her Duchess of Dumbshit, He wasn't just poking fun at her personally. He was exposing the absurdity of a system in which people can abandon royal duty while continuing to cling to royal titles for relevance. Comedy thrives on such contradictions, and Stewart, with his decades of experience, knows how to frame those contradictions in ways that resonate deeply with audiences. By reducing Meghan's carefully crafted image to a biting nickname, he made a broader statement about modern celebrity culture and its reliance on titles, brands, and narratives that often don't withstand scrutiny. This isn't new for Stewart. Throughout his career, he has used humor as a scalpel, cutting through layers of political spin, media noise, and cultural spectacle. When politicians twisted facts, he mocked them mercilessly. When news outlets sensationalized trivial stories, he exposed their hypocrisy. His audience learned to trust him not just because he was funny, but because he was right. In that sense, his joke about Meghan wasn't just a punchline. It was cultural validation. Many viewers had long felt that Meghan's public persona was riddled with contradictions, yet few mainstream voices had crystallized those doubts so bluntly. Stewart's commentary provided the clarity people were looking for, packaged in a way that made them laugh rather than lecture. Comedy as cultural commentary also has the unique power of bypassing defenses. People who might resist criticism in other forms, an article, an editorial, a debate, find themselves laughing at a joke before they realize it carries a sting of truth. Meghan Markle's defenders might have bristled at negative headlines about her, but Stewart's joke reached them through humor, making it harder to dismiss. That's the subversive power of satire. It infiltrates spaces where straightforward criticism would be rejected. Stewart, by making the audience laugh, planted seeds of doubt about Meghan's narrative in a way that was more effective than any news report. Part of the cultural commentary embedded in Stewart's moment is the ongoing debate about privilege. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry position themselves as victims of an oppressive monarchy and hostile press. Yet they live in California mansions, sign multi-million-dollar deals, and circulate in elite Hollywood circles. The dissonance between their claims of suffering and their lifestyle has been a point of contention for years. Stewart's joke distilled this frustration into a moment of laughter. By mocking her title, he was also mocking the idea that someone could simultaneously reject and profit from the monarchy, play both victim and celebrity, and expect audiences to sympathize uncritically. His comedy reflected the audience's fatigue with being told to view Meghan as a symbol of struggle while watching her reap the benefits of global fame. Another layer of Stewart's commentary lies in how comedy can expose societal obsessions. Why do we, as a culture, care so much about royalty in the first place? Why do the actions of one duchess or prince still dominate headlines in a world filled with crises? By turning Meghan into the butt of a joke, Stewart wasn't just mocking her. He was mocking the collective obsession with royalty that allows her to remain in the spotlight. He held up a mirror to the audience, asking implicitly, "Why are we still talking about this?" And the answer came in the form of laughter, an acknowledgement that yes, it is absurd, and yes, we are complicit in the absurdity. Stewart's style of cultural commentary also works because it is rooted in timing. He doesn't attack people when they are at their lowest or most vulnerable. Instead, he targets them when their narratives have begun to unravel, when the cracks are visible to everyone, and when laughter feels like release rather than cruelty. Meghan's public image had already been under strain when Stewart delivered his joke. Failed projects, waning public sympathy, and increasing skepticism about her authenticity made her an easy subject. By choosing that moment to mock her, Stewart ensured that his commentary would land not as bullying, but as truth-telling. The viral spread of the moment underscores how deeply comedy resonates as commentary. People didn't share the clip just because it was funny. They shared it because it said something they felt needed to be said. Laughter became a form of agreement, a way of signaling frustration with Meghan's contradictions without having to articulate a long critique. In this sense, Stewart's joke became shorthand for a broader cultural sentiment. That shorthand is what makes comedy so powerful as commentary. It condenses complex ideas into moments that are memorable, repeatable, and impossible to ignore. It is also worth reflecting on how Stewart's moment fits into the larger tradition of comedians as cultural truth-tellers. From George Carlin's rants about society to Richard Pryor's reflections on race and identity, The best comedians have always used humor as a way of addressing uncomfortable realities. Stewart stands firmly in this tradition. His Meghan joke, crude as it was, belongs to the lineage of comedy that seeks to puncture illusions and expose hypocrisy. By reducing her grand title to a laughable insult, he reminded audiences that power and privilege, no matter how carefully dressed up, are fair game for mockery. Critics of comedy often argue that jokes like Stewart's are unnecessary or cruel. But those critics miss the point of satire. The goal is not to be kind, it is to be clear. Comedy as cultural commentary is not about protecting reputations. It is about holding them accountable to the same scrutiny everyone else faces. Meghan Markle, as a public figure who has chosen to remain in the spotlight, is not exempt from this. Stewart's moment was a reminder that comedy, unlike public relations campaigns, cannot be controlled. It reflects what people are really thinking, what they are really frustrated by, and it does so in a way that bypasses the filters of politeness and decorum. Ultimately, Stewart's joke about Meghan was not just a laugh, it was a cultural statement. It told the world that the bubble of untouchability surrounding Meghan had burst, that her contradictions were now fair game, and that audiences were ready to laugh at her rather than with her. This is what makes comedy such a vital form of commentary. It doesn't just entertain. It shapes narratives, redirects conversations, and sometimes, as in this case, it changes the way a public figure is seen. The Duchess of Dumbshit line may be remembered as a joke, but its deeper significance lies in how it reflected and reinforced a cultural shift, one that Stewart articulated not with a lecture, but with a laugh. The problem of royal branding is one that has haunted Meghan Markle from the moment she married Prince Harry and took on the title of Duchess of Sussex. Branding, in the modern sense, is about crafting a story, a public identity that can be sold, consumed, and reinforced through media and appearances. For centuries, the monarchy itself has functioned as a brand. An institution that uses symbolism, ceremony, and narrative to project stability, tradition, and power. When Meghan stepped into that world, she didn't just inherit a title. She inherited the complexities of branding on a global scale. But what followed was a series of missteps, contradictions, and overexposures that made her not only controversial, but, ultimately, easy material for comedians like Jon Stewart. To understand why the Duchess of Dumbshit line landed with such force, one must explore how Meghan's branding strategy faltered. The monarchy's brand is built on mystique and consistency. Royals rarely explain themselves. Their silence, their rituals, their carefully choreographed appearances all contribute to an image that feels larger than life. Meghan, however, came from a background where visibility and self-expression were not only accepted but required. As an actress, her job had been to cultivate relatability, to promote projects, and to engage with the media. When she attempted to merge those instincts with the branding of royalty, the result was jarring. On one hand, she embraced the pomp of her wedding, the grandeur of her title, and the global attention that came with her role. On the other hand, she openly challenged the very institution she married into, giving interviews that criticized its traditions and members. This duality confused audiences. Was she embracing royalty or rejecting it? Was she a modernizer or a rebel? Branding works when it is consistent. Meghan's was anything but. This inconsistency became most glaring when she and Harry stepped away from royal duties. Their declaration of independence from the monarchy suggested they wanted privacy and freedom. Yet almost immediately, they signed multi-million-dollar deals with media giants like Netflix and Spotify, launched public speaking ventures, and engaged in interviews that shared deeply personal details of their lives. The disconnect between the stated desire for privacy and the constant pursuit of publicity created a branding problem that audiences couldn't ignore. Instead of being seen as a couple carving out a noble, independent life, they were perceived as opportunists using their titles while denying the responsibilities that came with them. Comedy thrives on this kind of contradiction, and Stewart's joke was a direct hit at the absurdity of carrying the title Duchess while acting in ways that stripped it of dignity. Another challenge in Meghan's branding was authenticity. Modern audiences are finely tuned to detect when someone is being genuine and when they are performing. Meghan's public appearances often leaned heavily into narratives of victimhood, emphasizing her struggles with the press, the institution, and even her family. While some found her vulnerability relatable, others saw it as calculated, as part of a branding effort designed to elicit sympathy. The problem with relying on sympathy as a brand is that it can wear thin quickly. Once people perceive a disconnect between words and actions, trust erodes. When Stewart mocked her with such bluntness, audiences laughed not only because it was funny, but because it resonated with their doubts about her sincerity. The failure of several high-profile projects also contributed to the erosion of Meghan's brand. Her Spotify podcast was announced with great fanfare, but ended with muted results, leading critics to argue that it lacked substance and staying power. Her Netflix collaborations, while heavily promoted, failed to generate the cultural impact of other documentaries or series. These stumbles reinforced the perception that Meghan's brand was built more on her title than her talent. In branding terms, she had become over-leveraged, relying too heavily on the prestige of her Duchess identity without delivering the substance needed to sustain it. Stewart's line cut directly into this weakness, suggesting that the title itself had become a hollow shell, stripped of credibility. The royal branding problem also lies in the global nature of Meghan and Harry's audience. In the United Kingdom, the monarchy still holds symbolic significance, and many viewed their departure as a betrayal. In the United States, where Meghan hoped to build her new image, the fascination with royalty is more rooted in celebrity culture. But celebrity branding is ruthless. Stars are expected to deliver entertainment, relatability, or inspiration. Meghan's brand, however, often presented her as someone above critique, someone who demanded admiration without consistently earning it. That imbalance made her vulnerable. American audiences may admire royalty from afar, but they are less forgiving. The stage was set, the lights dimmed, and an expectant crowd settled into their seats waiting for one of comedy's most respected voices to take the stage. Jon Stewart, a man whose name had long become synonymous with sharp political commentary and unflinching satire, walked onto the Netflix stage with the kind of quiet confidence only decades in the spotlight can afford. There was electricity in the air, the sort of restless anticipation that builds when an audience knows they're about to witness a cultural moment. But no one in that room, nor the millions who would later see the clips online, anticipated just how far Stewart would go when he turned his wit toward one of the most polarizing figures of our time, Meghan Markle. Within minutes, a joke landed so brutally, so cuttingly hilarious, that the crowd erupted into laughter and the internet exploded. The label Duchess of Dumbshit was born, and nothing about Meghan Markle's already fragile public image would ever be the same. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why did it strike such a chord? To understand that, you have to start with Jon Stewart himself. Unlike many comics who thrive on cheap shots and fleeting viral moments, Stewart has always been careful in how he wields his humor. He's a craftsman, building his jokes with precision, ensuring that when they land, they don't just make people laugh, they make them think. His special wasn't just another night of jokes. It was a reflection of the culture, the frustrations, the contradictions we live with every day. So when he shifted his focus to Meghan, the room collectively leaned forward. Here was a duchess who had stepped away from the crown, wrapped herself in celebrity, and stumbled through controversy after controversy. Stewart knew the territory was ripe, and he struck like a seasoned satirist who had been waiting for the right moment. The setup was simple. Stewart spoke about the bizarre theater of modern royalty and how, in a world facing real struggles, the endless headlines about Harry and Meghan seemed both absurd and exhausting. The punchline, though, was a thunderbolt, referring to her not as Duchess of Sussex, but as Duchess of Dumbshit. The audience roared, and in that instant, the mask of untouchability Meghan had so carefully tried to wear cracked open. This wasn't a bitter tabloid headline or a cruel internet meme. It was a cultural heavyweight, a man respected for decades, cutting her down in front of a live audience and a Netflix camera crew. And what made it even more explosive was that it was funny. Not mean-spirited in the sense of pure malice, but funny in the way truth sometimes is when spoken out loud in a room full of people who've secretly been thinking the same thing. Comedy, when it's at its best, acts as a mirror. It reflects the absurdities of life, the hypocrisies, the contradictions, and holds them up for everyone to see. Meghan Markle had long tried to shape her narrative as the misunderstood Duchess, the woman who stood up against a centuries-old institution, the victim of relentless press scrutiny. Yet, her Netflix shows, her Spotify deal, her public appearances often seemed more like vanity projects than meaningful contributions. Audiences began to question her authenticity, sensing a widening gap between her words and her actions. Stewart tapped into that exact feeling. His joke crystallized what many had whispered but few dared to say on such a stage, that perhaps Meghan, for all her carefully crafted image, was not a symbol of empowerment but of entitlement. The crowd's reaction told its own story. They weren't just laughing at a clever line. They were releasing a pent-up frustration. The laughter was cathartic, a way of acknowledging that yes, the royal drama had become ridiculous, and yes, Meghan had positioned herself at the center of it with questionable success. The viral clips captured not just Stewart's delivery, but the collective exhale of an audience that had been waiting for someone to finally puncture the bubble. When the video hit social media, it spread like wildfire. Twitter feeds lit up with the quote. TikTok users clipped it into montages, and YouTube channels broke down the moment frame by frame. The phrase, Duchess of Dumb Shit, wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a headline, a meme, a cultural stamp that would follow Meghan wherever she went. But the significance goes beyond the laughter. Stewart's moment highlighted something deeper about how society views Meghan Markle. On one hand, she is defended by a loyal base of fans who see her as a victim of racism, misogyny, and an outdated monarchy. On the other, she is criticized by those who believe she has exploited her royal title while simultaneously claiming to reject it. Stewart didn't need to delve into the politics of it. The power of his joke was that it distilled the art.